So good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Mateusz Piotrowski. I'm the president of Europa Patient Association, and I would like to welcome you all at a press conference dedicated to presentation of recommendations of the workshop organized by the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences and Europa Patient. And before I shall pass it to our distinguished guests, let me before explain why are we here and why our press conference today is entitled Eliminating COVID, Saving European Green Deal. Europe is in a profound crisis, becoming the epicenter of the virus. EU's inability to eliminate COVID has major consequences. It destroys citizens' trust in political institutions and in science. It kills many thousands of Europeans daily, and what we are witnessing is a normalization of catastrophe. This all happens in a situation when we know what to do to make Europe COVID-free. So lack of action on COVID seriously endangers Europe's chance to lead the successful fight against climate change, climate catastrophe. If we get used to living with COVID, let me make it very clear, if we get used to living with so many Europeans people all over the world also dying daily, soon we will be told to get used to live with climate breakdown instead of fighting it. That is why a number of top experts, scientists, economists, religious leaders, secular opinion leaders as well, across the political spectrum very much, have gathered to come up with these recommendations. So the structure of today's meeting will be very simple. I will pass it now very soon to our first speaker, who will cover one of 7 key points of our final statements, our recommendations, and will speak in less than 3 minutes to this point, and then pass it to the second, to the third, and so on. And at the end, we'll open the floor for the questions that might arise. So let us start with the first recommendation, according to which, due to the disastrous effects which approaches based on living with COVID have on economy, public health, and trust, a virus elimination strategy needs to be implemented with a supplementary temporary income to get populations on board. So I'll pass it now to Dr. Alessio Pecorario, who serves as coordinator of the Security Task Force of the Vatican COVID Commission. The mic is yours, Alessio.
Thank you so much, Mateusz. I am very grateful for being here, and I'm sorry that I have another institutional commitment, so that's mean that after my, let's say, reflection, I am forced to leave. Regarding the point that has been assigned to me, I wanted to say that in Pope Francis' reading, the COVID-19 pandemic is an acceleration of pre-existing contradictions that have generated interconnected sanitary and socio-political crises. A dignified occupation is maybe the most urgent social need we can see among the world of priorities. As the International Labour Organization points out, employment impact of the pandemic is worse than expected. The ILO is now projected the global hours work in 2021 will be 4.3% below pre-pandemic levels, the equivalent of 155 million full-time jobs. What is at stake is not only the quantity of work, since the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated trends, reinforcing concerns and highlighting also the importance of achieving job quality for all. All this considered, immediate financial instruments like a temporary universal basic income might sound like radical solutions, but in times of need, they can provide some much needed assistance. They can support people and keep them out of poverty while giving them an escape route to avoid falling into underpaid and informal work. After the crisis, they can help reshape power relations within the labor markets and empower the vulnerable. Moreover, in a world in which unpaid, unrecognized, and informal work, such as domestic work or care work, were suddenly intensified, immediate financial assistance instrument can give the people, primarily women, who perform such tasks additionally, support to conduct their activities in a dignified manner. Finally, these instruments may contribute to the decent remuneration of workers that were previously underpaid and under-recognized, but were actually essential for the function of the society. Supermarket clerks, sanitary workers, public service providers, etc. The political benefit of these instruments demand a further analysis. Their future implication of the use, their sustainability, and their potential impacts they may have in specific contexts are not widely known yet. But given their potential to safeguard equity and alleviate the burden of the poor in times of crisis, their consideration is welcome. Europe, the cradle of the Industrial Revolution some 20, 50 years ago, has to take the lead in addressing all the dimensions of the crisis, sanitary, economic, environmental, and socio-political, with a lens that captures all its phases. For this reason, the European Green Deal must expand itself to think beyond just European. We need an additional one that leads us toward a new universal solidarity, as Pope Francis says in Fratelli Tutti, all brothers and sisters, towards a solidarity that only authentic dialogue can produce and which must be based on interdependence and shared responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessio. So let us now proceed to the second recommendation, stating that the EU has to implement COVID elimination strategies based on broad set of preventive measures to make Europe COVID-free. And I'll pass it to Professor Yaneer Bar-Yam, who's the president of the New England Complex System Institute and the president of World Health Network. Yaneer, to you.
Thank you. I think the key thing is to realize that there are two false ideas. One is that we cannot achieve elimination. And the other one has been that we have to balance health against economy. And it's really important to understand that we do have within our power, and it is not a biological challenge that we face, but the societal challenge. And the people who should be involved in this are people who understand leadership and community action as the center of the effort to achieve elimination. And we have examples around the world that are doing much, much better than Europe. Currently, Japan has achieved only 1 case per million after having very large number of cases per day this past summer. It is really possible to dramatically reduce the number of cases and then to target progressive elimination around the world. And the actions that are needed are actions that we know. The only thing that is really standing in our way are these two false dichotomies of the false ideas that we cannot somehow, we are self-limiting our actions by believing that we cannot do things rather than engaging in the challenge of actual action. And the second, it is quite apparent from any analysis of the economic conditions that those countries that are achieving strong reduction in cases, those countries that are achieving elimination are doing much better, with China having very rapid growth while the rest of the world, much of the rest of the world that has tremendous number of cases is doing much better. But it is true also about many other countries that have achieved strong suppression and are targeting elimination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yaneer. And I think it's a very good introduction to the next point, stating very much the political responsibility for solving this crisis. And the next point of our final statements states that an intergovernmental panel on COVID and on the prevention of new pandemics has to be created, just as there is an intergovernmental panel on climate change. And I'll pass it now to Mr. Philippe Lamberts, who's the co-president of the Greens group in the European Parliament. Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mateusz. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those who are in the US. Well, it's quite obvious that this is a global challenge that we are facing. As Mateusz said, it's exactly like climate. There's some challenges that know no boundaries, and therefore we need global action. But as you know, we don't have a global government, we don't have a global democracy, and we are far from it, which means that we need cooperation amongst governments across the world. What we see at the moment is that there's little, if any, coordination of action. It's quite visible on the front of vaccines. Vaccination rates are very different across the world, and the Omicron variant shows us that indeed, if we do not have a global approach to that, well, you know, the virus will generate new variants here or there, where the protection is much lower, and therefore this is what we need. This is also a challenge which requires financial solidarity. We have that for climate, where basically what we try to do is indeed making sure that those countries that has the most capabilities, but also the biggest responsibilities for climate change, are actually financially helping the countries that have less responsibilities and less capability to do something about that. It's quite obvious that the same thing needs to happen in terms of fighting COVID. It's obvious that developing countries do not have the same financial means. Now, there's many ways to do that, of course. Direct financial help. At the moment, with the COVAX initiative, we are, rich countries are supplying vaccines to developing countries, but we see that this is not enough. Obviously, it's not enough. A TRIPS waiver for the intellectual property rights of vaccines is in order. And I would say, when I see the amount of public support that has been given to the pharmaceutical companies in order to develop the vaccines, it's fair to say that they cannot privatize the profits after having benefited from a socialized investment. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I think, again, it's a very good bridge to next point of our recommendations, stating that the EU has to effectively support global vaccine equity, including European Commission supporting lifting the patents on COVID-19. So if Europe is to survive as human rights-based soft power. So I'll pass it now to Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who's a member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Science, among many other institutions. So to you, Professor Sachs.
Thank you very much, Mateusz. Greetings to the rest of the panelists and the participants. We are really obviously failing in this pandemic, and Omicron is not only the latest disaster, but was a predicted part of what would happen if we failed to get the pandemic under control. For months and months and months, many of us kept saying there will be new variants unless we take much more action to suppress the virus wherever it is in the world. This virus, we think, emerged in South Africa. Nobody knows for sure where, but it has spread worldwide, making the basic point that this is a global phenomenon that needs to be controlled globally. Philippe just said we don't have global government. We do have a World Health Organization, I want to emphasize, and it is tremendously underperforming because it has not had the backing from the United States and other major powers that is needed right now. We will not have vaccine coverage. We will not succeed just by talking about it. We cannot take the time to invent a new institution, nor do we need a new institution. We need to make WHO work. We need responsibility, not only of Europe, the European Union, obviously, but the United States, China, Russia. We've got to get off of the Cold War business for a moment and save humanity. So instead of all the bickering among the major powers, they need to meet in Geneva to make an adequate plan for vaccine coverage, for scaling up production, and for ensuring best practices and actions. It's absurd what is happening right now, and I'm profoundly disappointed with my country, the United States, for its, I don't care how many vaccines they claim to give, if they don't meet with the Chinese counterparts and with Europe and with Russia and sit down to solve this with a practical plan, it's not going to work. This is the basic point. And it's been 2 years now, and it's just bickering or national leaders preening and saying, we'll give this, we'll give that, rather than talking with each other. So that's my basic point. We're not going to have a plan. We're not going to solve any of this until we're speaking with each other. And I want our Secretary of State and our president to stop talking about China as an enemy and start sitting down and dealing with China and with Europe and with Russia also to help solve the problem as the major vaccine producing countries to make a plan. By the way, by the end of this month, 40% of every country's population was supposed to be covered by vaccines. In Africa right now, the average is 8%. That is because of the despicable lack of seriousness by the major countries. And I'll put mine, the United States, at the top of the list of neglect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. So now we move to the next point, stating that long COVID, with more than 100 million victims worldwide, has to be recognized as threat to Europe's resilience, economy, and well-being of its citizens. And I'll pass it to Professor Jeremy Rossman from University of Kent, who's also the president of Pandemic Aid Networks. To you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. I just want to say here that the pandemic will not end without our actions. This is not the flu. This will not fade into an ordinary endemic virus with risks that we can or should live with. As long as the virus continues to circulate, we are going to have new variants that may further evade the protection of the vaccines, just like we're seeing with Omicron. And we will continue to have hospitalizations and fatalities due to COVID, and more people will develop long COVID with long-term effects to health and well-being that will strain the medical infrastructure of countries around the world to come. We need to act, and we need to act globally. And part of that is vaccination globally. But it's also important to remember that even with full coverage of the entire world with vaccines, everybody does not get to go back to normal. And we need to ensure that our recovery does not leave people behind. We still don't have vaccines approved for young children, but children can be infected, transmit the virus, and develop long COVID. The pandemic would not be over for the clinically vulnerable that are immunosuppressed or immunocompromised and can't get vaccinated or don't build a protective immune response. The pandemic would not be over for those with long COVID. The WHO estimates that there's over 100 million people that already have long COVID, including children. And they need the acknowledgement by countries around the world and support, including financial support from countries around the world. We all want to get back to normal, but a return to normal is not possible without all of our concerted efforts. We can slow COVID transmission, protect health and well-being, and look to recovery for all members of society. We know what to do. We just need to take the actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And now we're moving to next point, stating that we cannot rely solely on vaccines in the hope that this technical measure will spare us the effort to deal with the root causes of the present crisis and to restructure our economies and politics. And I'll pass it now to Professor Rocco Buttiglione, who's also a member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, former Minister for European Affairs of the Italian Republic. Rocco, the floor is yours. You just need to unmute 1 second, the microphone on the left, and now, yes, now.
Thank you, Mateusz. We are progressively becoming conscious of the fact that we need a word governance, like Jeffrey Sachs pointed out. Nevertheless, reality is running faster than our self-consciousness. And we already have the consequences of not having had a world governance up to now. The COVID pandemic is, first of all, the result of the reduction of the genetic variety produced by an economic development that has not taken into account the need to preserve nature as it is in its wealth and its enormous variety of life forms. We need to preserve better the environment if we want to avoid that periodically new pandemics will be created and we arrive to our countries. We need to recover the idea of nature. For a long time, we have lived with the conviction that we create the world. Man creates the world, creates the environment, and the existing environment has no right to be respected, can be altered according to the demands of the human mind. And the demand of the human mind is a philosophical expression. Economically, one should say, according to the demand of great multinational organizations and companies. But nature rebels against this. And we are facing the consequences of this mistreatment, mismanagement of natural resources. COVID brings to evidence long-standing defects and problems of our societies. There are not only the vaccines, there is also prophylaxis, but prophylaxis in Western countries doesn't work. It works much better in China. Why? Because there is a break between the ruled and the rulers. People do not trust their governments. The people are frustrated and want to affirm their protest in some ways that are absolutely crazy. I prefer to die rather than to recognize that my government was proposing to me the right course of action. We should treat this frustration. It is a pendant to the mismanagement of nature. There is a mismanagement of the human mind, and our societies have a growing frustration among the people. And the people do not trust governments, and governments do not trust people, and manifest an incapacity to lead in times of difficulty. On the background of all this, there is a great cultural crisis. We have lost the idea of nature, and we have lost the idea of solidarity. COVID tells us that we all belong to the same human race, and we can all be infected, and there is no security for anybody until there will be security for everybody. That is, until the disease is not eradicated in Africa, it will always have the possibility of coming back to Europe in new forms that we cannot be prepared to match and to win. We have to recover the idea of nature, the respect for nature, the right of nature, and we have to recover the idea of solidarity in Europe and beyond the European borders, with the old world, and particularly with the part of the world that most stand in need of help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rocco. I think, again, it's an excellent introduction to the last last recommendation, which will be presented in just a while by Chiara Martinelli, who's the director of Climate Action Network Europe. Recommendation stating that to avoid backlash, the lack of support from the citizens, the European Green Deal has to be ambitious both in terms of the environmental protection and socio-economic terms, consigning all fossil fuels to history while strengthening workers' co-determination and protecting poorer member states and poorer social strata. So I'll pass it now to Chiara Martinelli.
Thank you. Thank you, Mateusz. So indeed, the current pandemic has definitely been another clear alarm about the broken harmony between humanity and nature, as Professor Buttiglione just said. A clear alarm about how vulnerable our society is to crisis. And it is a wake-up call about the current state of climate emergency, aggravated by systemic inequalities across the globe. As Pope Francis reminding us many times, and boldly in the encyclical Laudato Si, taking action to avert catastrophic climate change is a moral imperative. To not do so will be an act of injustice against those communities and workers who are most impacted by the climate crisis and industrial pollution in Europe and beyond Europe. It is evident that Europe can avoid the worst impact of the crisis if we all take fast, bold, and united actions. There is still an opportunity for Europe to avoid dangerous levels of climate crisis by showing global leadership to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, as stated in the Paris Agreement. However, this can only happen, as we stated in our conference early October, if Europe makes fossil fuel phase out a reality. And this is not possible by continuing endless support for fossil gas, as we are witnessing currently in Brussels discussions. Europe is in an unprecedented political situation with the Green Deal and must make the best use of it to ensure a socially just and fair transition for all, while delivering its commitment to the Paris Agreement objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiara. Thank you to all the panelists. So now, yeah, the floor is open for questions. If needed, I can also provide a translation, but feel free to ask questions in English as well. So yes, please. So we're waiting for questions if there are any. Okay, I can also see some questions in the chat box. So let me just try, and whoever wants to respond is from our of our panelists is welcome to take this. So the question basically is that, like, why, if eliminating virus is possible, what stands in what blocks making it possible in Europe, if Europe, you know, has resources, quite good healthcare compared to other parts of the world. If it will be doable, why it is not done yet in Europe? And whoever wants to take the floor is very, very welcome. I think Yaneer is raising his hand, so to Professor Bar-Yam.
Yeah, again, I think that the key thing is recognizing that it is possible. People disable themselves by believing that they cannot achieve something. They don't try, and they don't show to themselves that they're able to do things. And recently in Europe, there was much more rapid response to the Omicron variant than there was to previous variants. And that led to an opportunity to control the virus before it came into Europe. If action had been done at the time also to stop the localized outbreaks that had occurred, it would have been controlled, as was demonstrated in Israel. Israel has very few cases at this point compared to several countries in Europe. Again, Japan has very strong travel restrictions, so that I think there was just now one case of community transmission, and that's all aside from travelers. So the point is that recognizing that there are several tools that need to be acted in coordination, the travel restrictions and the local control over the spread of the virus enables one to be successful. So we have to learn that we can do that, and by learning we can do that, then we gain the confidence that it is possible. And indeed, in other countries of the world, even places where there have been terrible outbreaks, like India, where now it's already 7 months since the previous outbreak, they are down at low numbers of cases and are acting rapidly with snap lockdowns to control things locally. And they have nationwide COVID-appropriate behavior that is enabling, providing a background of control where they're continuing to go down in number of cases.
Thank you very much. I also have another question, which I think is mostly directed to the politicians or people with big political experience among our guests. So what politics can really do, and in this context, what kind of hopes we can put in the new German government, or what demands should we have towards this new emerging leadership in the European Union? So a question about political action. Philippe, Rocco, feel free to answer. Just if you would like to speak, please unmute yourself. I think Philippe is taking, and Rocco
I'm
maybe.
not part of the emerging generation of policymakers. This is my last term in the European Parliament, so so not sure what I can say about that. But of course, the political choice that has been made is indeed not to go for suppression, but rather to contain basically the spread of the virus, because indeed, well, if you want to suppress it, you have to put in place very drastic restrictions in terms of travel, but also of activity. And I think that there's no preparedness to do that in Europe, well, neither in the political class nor within the population. I mean, you can already see that there's many movements against any form of restriction. And even those that are implemented in order to prevent, well, not to prevent, to slow down the spread of the new variants are not well received by the population. So, so I think there's a sort of fatigue of the measures being taken, which leads indeed to caution in the measures that are being taken. And sometimes, well, they are not taken soon enough. Indeed, I would have liked to see more radical action when Omicron was detected. But again, we are where we are. And I can see that many governments felt that their population could not stand the drastic action that should have been taken, and therefore recalled from it.
Yes, Rocco?
I agree. There is what Pope Benedict XVI called the dictature of relativism. People think that they create their own world, and they think that to be free means to have no rules, not to accept any rules. So there is a strong opposition against prophylaxis rules. Vaccines are not enough. You must observe a set of rules. I am worried about the fact that in Africa, only 8% of the people have been vaccinated, and in Africa, the virus will reproduce itself and change and mutate and come back. But I'm worried also because in Italy, we have 6 million people who are not vaccinated and don't want to be vaccinated. In the United States, 30% of United States citizens are not vaccinated. So even if we had vaccinated all the Africans, nevertheless, the virus would have a broad basin in which to reproduce and to mutate in the United States, in Italy, and in other European countries. What's wrong with the general culture of our nations?
I think it's a very good question. I think the final statements prepared by the meeting organized by the Pontifical Academy and Europe Patient provides important questions, answers to these questions in form of implementable recommendation. So thanking, because we're heading towards the end time of this press conference, I would like just to thank again the panelists who, as we can also see, represent different countries, different political backgrounds, different also scientific backgrounds, and who are united. And I think this is a big achievement already in conviction that strong action against COVID towards elimination is not only possible, but it's absolutely necessary if we are not to see the social fabric of our institutions decaying ultimately, and being in a much worse crisis, even if this seems that it's impossible to be in a worse situation. But I definitely think this brings hope, and will keep on advocating for these measures. I think that such a big coalition shows that there's also a growing consensus behind these instruments to be implemented. So again, thank you very much to everyone. We'll be continuing to inform on further actions in this respect. So again, thank you very much for your time, and hope to see you soon, when hopefully we can speak of some more genuine actions to stop this catastrophe towards elimination of the virus, and also towards better dealing with the climate crisis. So yeah, let me close the meeting, and thank you very much to all stakeholders engaged.